practices categories and urges men to discard, close, ignore and abandon them. And with these four injunctions, he leads all people astray. And on top of that, he groups together all the sage monks of the three countries of India, China and Japan, as well as the students of Buddhism of the 10 directions, and calls them a band of robbers, causing the people to insult them. In doing so, he turns his back on the passages in the 3 Pure Land Sutras, the sutras of his own sect, which vow that the Nembutsu will bring salvation to everyone except those who commit the 5 cardinal sins or slander the true law. At the same time, he shows that he fails to understand the warning contained in the Lotus Sutra, the most important sutra expounded in the 5 preaching periods of the Buddha's life, which reads, "One who refuses to take faith in this sutra and instead slanders it will, after he dies, fall into the hell of incessant suffering." And now we have come to this later age when men are no longer sages. Each enters his own dark road, and all alike forget the straight way. How pitiful that no one cures them of their blindness. How painful to see them vainly lending encouragement to these false beliefs. And as a result, everyone, from the ruler of the nation down to the lowest peasant, believes that there are no true sutras outside the 3 Pure Land Sutras, and no Buddhas other than the Buddha Amida with his 2 attendants. Once there were men like Dengyo, Gishin, Jikaku and Chisho who journeyed 10,000 miles across the waves to acquire the sacred teachings, or visited all the mountains and rivers of China to acquire Buddhist statues which they held in reverence. In some cases, they created holy realms on the peaks of high mountains in which to preserve the scriptures and statues. In other cases, they constructed sacred halls in the bottoms of deep valleys where such objects could be worshipped and honored. As a result, the Buddhas Shakyamuni and Yakushi shone side by side, casting their influence upon present and future ages, while the Bodhisattvas Kokuzo and Jizo brought benefit to the living and the dead. The rulers of the nation contributed counties or villages so that the lamps might continue to burn bright before the images, while the stewards of the great estates offered their fields and gardens to provide for the upkeep of the temples. But because of this book by Honen, this Senchaku Shu, the Lord Buddha Shakyamuni is forgotten, and all honor is paid to Amida, the Buddha of the Western land. The Lord Buddha's transmission of the law is ignored, and Yakushi, the Buddha of the Eastern region, is neglected. All attention is paid to the 3 works in 4 volumes of the Pure Land Scriptures, and the other wonderful teachings that Shakyamuni proclaimed throughout the 5 periods of his preaching life are cast aside. If temples are not dedicated to Amida, then people no longer have any desire to support them or pay honor to the Buddhas enshrined there. If monks do not practice the Nembutsu, then people quickly forget all about giving them alms and contributions. As a result, the halls of the Buddha fall into ruin, scarcely a wisp of smoke rising above their mossy tiles. And the monks' quarters stand empty and dilapidated, the dew deep on the grasses in their courtyards. And in spite of such conditions, no one gives a thought to protecting the law, or to rebuilding or restoring the temples. Hence the sage monks who once presided over the temples go away and do not return. And the benevolent deities who guarded the Buddhist teachings depart and do not appear any longer. This has all come about because of this Senchaku Shu of Honen. How pitiful to think that in the space of a few decades, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of people have been deluded by these devilish teachings, and in so many cases confused as to the true teachings of Buddhism. If people favor perverse doctrines and forget what is correct, can the benevolent deities be otherwise than angry? If people cast aside doctrines that are all-encompassing and take up those that are incomplete, can the world escape the plots of demons? Rather than offering up 10,000 prayers for remedy, it would be better simply to outlaw this evil doctrine that is the source of all the trouble.
This time the guest was truly enraged. On that, so you've just heard Bill Reed is at the same time, isn't it, really exciting? To me it is anyway. It's exciting because of its preciseness, and at the same time its absolute certainty of the righteousness of what he was saying. So everything is carefully documented. Everything is carefully stated against documentary proof. At this stage, of course, in this gosho, he's not concerned with actual proof, which Nichiren Daishonin himself said was the most important form of proof, but with documentary proof in order to refute Nembutsu for good and all. The most important lines are right at the beginning of the answer. 3 lines down, he contradicted the sacred teachings of Shakyamuni. This is Mappo. When this gosho was written, it was in the very first centuries of Mappo. This is exactly what Shakyamuni had predicted 2,000 years before that. The loss of his, Shakyamuni's, pure law in the age of Mappo, when the world would be in a state of chaos and destruction. Japan, as we've already said, was in this state of chaos, the same state of chaos that the world is in today. The priests in those times were dressed like soldiers rather than priests. On the way out to Tozan, as it happened, on the aeroplane, they showed, actually it was a rotten film, wasn't it? But it was interesting in a way, because it was concerned with the period in Japanese history about 100 years before what we're talking about now. And one could see this extraordinary situation where the monks and priests were involved in incessant violence and fighting against each other to protect their own power and privileged position in the land. An amazing situation for Buddhism to find itself in. This was the world in which Nichiren Daishonin was born. So these monks and priests' concern was with profit and power far more than anything else. And of course, as we've said in previous lectures, we see the same thing in our own history. In the days of the great Cardinal Wolsey and so on, where the religious power was totally intertwined with secular power. In the case of the histories of the monasteries in this country, as I said earlier, we saw it and see it. The church became hugely rich through exploiting their knowledge over the people. And with this land and riches, they were able to lend to the king, and even sometimes blackmail the king, so that they would be powerfully established politically in the country. Religion, in other words, was totally impure and mixed up with politics. Even today, the bishops sit in the House of Lords with a vote. This in its turn led later, in more recent years, with the condoning of war. Priests on both sides preaching the love of God and the righteousness of the cause for which their country was fighting. Time and again this occurred in European history. When people are under the influence of the wrong teachings, a vicious cycle of evil is set up. The 3 calamities and 7 disasters arise, and this causes the people to want to escape from life as it is. Then the escapist teachings and religions appear. Today, of course, more than anything, there are other means of escape. Drugs, drink, discos, incessant music, sex, mysticism. There is a plethora of pathetic sects and cults in every corner of this country. Even divorce is a means of escape. People demanding too much of each other because they can't bear the life around them, and those individuals not being able to provide such strong demands. This is a terrible disease which is passed on from generation to generation. Worse still, it weakens life force steadily from generation to generation. The weakness of religion still afflicts us to this day. Maybe quite a number of people sitting here at this moment never really practiced Christianity. Maybe they did. Either way, Christianity and its weak points is still rooted in us. What is the thing that we suffer from most? Maybe I'm in a good position to judge, because I meet so many of you and hear your troubles. At the root of so many things is guilt. Guilt is bred from the teachings of Christianity as made by the church. I'm not in the least saying as made by Jesus Christ himself. This is where guilt has arisen from. It's very difficult for people in the East to understand how powerful guilt is in our lives and how evil it is. A number of times I've heard Japanese leaders trying to give guidance where guilt is concerned, and many of them find it very difficult because they can't visualize such a thing. Yet it holds an incredible grip on most Western lives. Guilt is utterly negative. Guilt exhausts life force. Guilt is purposeless. And thank goodness, we here were fortunate enough to find the Gohonzon and to begin to understand the teaching of Honin-myo based on the law of cause and effect. The teaching of Honin-myo which says it doesn't matter what happened before. The lower six worlds are part of human life. One can't escape from them. What matters is to make the great causes now to elevate your Buddha state and turn all those lower worlds into influences of value. Out of this distorted and incomplete teachings also came the class war. It was the priests who established authoritarianism. It was the priests who taught that human beings were superior to all other forms of life. It was the priests with their knowledge who looked down on the people and taught others who said they were religious and had knowledge to look down on the people. This is where this has all arisen from. Everything can be traced back in the history of this world of ours to the wrong religion and philosophy. So all our afflictions of today in this country and elsewhere arise from nowhere else but this point. Another important passage in that long answer is on page 18. The left-hand column, I'll read it once again. And now we have come to this later age when men are no longer sages. Each enters his own dark road, and all alike forget the straight way. How pitiful that no one cures them of their blindness. How painful to see them vainly lending encouragement these false beliefs. And as a result, everyone from the ruler of the nation down to the lowest peasant believes that there are no true sutras outside the 3 Pure Land Sutras, and no Buddhas other than the Buddha Amida with his 2 attendants. And now we have come to this later age, Nichiren Daishonin says. In a gosho called A Decreasing Span of Life, Nichiren Daishonin explains that it's inevitable that as human beings develop intellectually, so their capacity for evil actions grow. In other words, the 3 poisons take over. This, as you can well understand, is because of people developing arrogant and conceited minds, using their superior knowledge to have power and influence over others. We've already talked of many examples of this occurring. This is the age of Mappo, which Shakyamuni predicted would be filled with the 3 poisons. Because as the world advances and intellectual capacity grows, so unfortunately does the ego. So it's vital to master and control this terrible tendency. This tendency which is insidious and creeps in on life and society almost without one realizing it. We must find the philosophy which is wiser than the cleverest person, and greater, deeper, and wider than the most profound knowledge. And I know of no other philosophy except that of Nam-myoho Renge Kyo which meets these requirements. In this respect, I want to ask Bill to read a quote from President Ikeda's speech at the second SGI General Meeting in Hawaii.
It may be said of all the world's philosophies, systems of thought, and religions, that though they were meant to precisely direct the current of the age, they are no longer capable of controlling basic human nature. In other words, it may be said that man is now unable to suppress his evil desires and has fallen prey to his ego. Such philosophies, concepts, and religions have proven to be as transient as the moon and to fade just like the setting sun. They are unable to cope with the extreme speed with which the times and people's values change, or with the diversity of change inherent in human culture. As a result, they have become bereft of the power to provide their respective peoples, let alone the entire human race, with a precise direction in life, one that restores vigor and instills courage.
So, Sensei is saying there that man has lost control of himself because of the weakness of religion and the philosophies and teachings he follows. Due to these teachings' inability to keep pace with the incredible speed in which the times are changing and developing. So, of course, this began hundreds of years ago when the church refused to believe that the world was round, despite all the proof that was given to it. This was one example of how far this goes back. It couldn't keep pace with the times. The churchmen of those days couldn't understand how they could support this philosophy of a round world instead of a flat one. It sounds ridiculous in these times, but it continues today, doesn't it? Contraception in certain branches of the church is still said to be wrong, totally wrong, under any formal circumstance. Yet it is available in vast quantities for everybody. And of course, there is a thing called a world population problem. So what does this lead to? To those who are sincere and serious-minded, it can only lead to guilt or fear where the sexual act is concerned. Through this narrowness, through this control over people's lives and minds, guilt once again is nurtured in human lives. Likewise, if we look at the arts or science or economics, today they are ridden with the three poisons. And because of this, they cannot always really contribute to people's fundamental happiness. For example, in the arts, due to a growing emphasis on sex and violence, these desires are stimulated in others. And so these evils spread. Certainly no happiness is caused through it, in the true meaning of the word. In economics, the motive of profit, of course, breeds greed. At the same time, the motive of collectivism breeds apathy and takes the challenge out of life. In science, we see people encouraging consumers to spend and waste. Products are built deliberately with a limited life to encourage further spending. Worst of all, there are an enormous number of people and money involved in the production of weapons of destruction, and in particular nuclear devices. Mr. Toda said adamantly, all who are involved in the construction of such weapons are doing the devil's work. So how can we straighten the body of society and remove these poisons? The only way is, once again, to spread the true law, an understanding of the law of life, to establish the ultimate truth in every land, just the same as this title of this gosho implies, to establish absolute respect for life above all else. So in history, there are lots of examples of pure intentions too being distorted. So when the philosophy of capitalism was expounded first of all, it was expounded with sincerity by such people as Adam Smith. They really believed that it was right for the people. But in time this ism was pursued for the sake of it and for the sake of power and greed. Marx also had pure intentions originally. He expounded a philosophy which he firmly believed would bring happiness to the people. But his teachings became the tool of politicians who wanted to gain power and hold on to it. So power is a terrible attraction towards the evil way. How can we ensure that people with such pure and noble intentions can follow the course on which they've embarked and not have all they teach torn asunder and used for evil? Again, there is no other way, I believe, than Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. There is no other power within human life which is strong enough to sustain following a course which is valuable and good and right. So we've said many times that there have been many philosophies in this world, but not one of them gave a practice which had the power to sustain it. So these philosophies were nothing else but empty idealism. But in the case of Nichiren Daishonin, he gave us the practice to produce this power with which to sustain a course of value both to ourselves and to the world around us. Towards the end of this answer, Nichiren Daishonin says, if people favor perverse doctrines and forget what is correct, can the benevolent deities be otherwise than angry? If people cast aside doctrines that are all-encompassing and take up those that are incomplete, can the world escape the plots of demons? Rather than offering up 10,000 prayers for remedy, it would be better simply to outlaw this evil doctrine that is the source of all the trouble. So every ill is traceable to the wrong religion or teaching. Only we, such a few in number in this country, so far have the ability to spread the true teaching, to establish the ultimate truth in this land. But through the recent meetings of Soka Gakkai International in Hawaii, and through President Ikeda's visit to Europe, we are beginning to feel that we're not alone, that we're part of one amazing human movement which is spreading its influence throughout the world, with one desire: to see people happy and to spread a teaching which can achieve peace. So now I'll ask Bill to read one more extract from Sensei's speech at that vital meeting in Hawaii.
People naturally desire peace on this planet above all else. Their dream is for the flowering of human culture in the soil of perpetual peace in this world. It is only natural that people desire to live happily to the end. Man is aware of the cruelty and barbarity of war, but peace can never be attained by passively waiting for it. In order to secure their right to happiness, each and every individual of every nationality must now be awakened to the growing necessity to proclaim their demands for peace. In any case, neither peace nor culture can be born only of concepts. People must realize that a firm foundation of true peace and culture can be constructed only through action, through the practice of a profound and steadfast faith or principle which lays the greatest stress on the absolute respect for life. Not publicity or idealism, but action in its real sense is required for this cause today.
So what is this action? Of course, it's making friends. And it's shakubuku. It's sharing our thoughts about the state of this world, many of which have been contained in this series of lectures, with others. And even if those friends cannot all chant Nam-myoho Renge Kyo, at least we can begin to open their eyes to the true situation in this world. And understanding and observing the life force which exists in us, they may begin to believe in us and to respect what we're doing and to give us their wholehearted support, even though they are unable, through the state of their karma, to practice themselves. So making friends, as well as doing shakubuku, is what Sensei is talking about in this speech. It seems so simple, yet it requires tenacity and strength, and above all, life force, if those friends are truly to respect what we're doing. There's one more paragraph I'd like to quote from this speech to conclude the lecture.
At this moment, I would like to proclaim that the Soka Gakkai International will forever uphold the spirit of the eternal principles of Nichiren Daishonin as we proceed valiantly along the great road toward the enhancement of peace, culture, and education. Would you agree with this? For the purpose of disseminating this profound doctrine of the perpetual law of cause and effect, the Buddhism of Nichiren Shoshu, among as many people of the world as possible, I am determined to defy all hardships and travel to all corners of the world, explaining and spreading this faith throughout my life.
Thank you. And it's our task, isn't it, to do the same thing in our own environment, just as Sensei does it in his environment. Wherever we go, to spread these teachings, whether or not people listen to what we say, but to engage in active discussion and to make our circle of friends wider and wider, so more and more people can see the power of the Gohonzon working in our own lives, in our own environment, our neighborhood or community, amongst our family or friends. Our task is the same as sensei's. For people to see what life force really means when it's working in the life of an ordinary human being. Sometimes we lack confidence over this point. We think we're still surrounded by problems. How can I influence anyone? Yet what is it that a person first says when they come to a discussion meeting? Oh, there's something about that atmosphere or spirit which is great. What is that atmosphere or spirit? Nothing else but the life force of practice to the Gohonzon. Wherever anyone goes who is practicing to the Gohonzon, this life force can be felt. So please let's from now on go out with confidence, realizing that we can earn respect and we can spread the teachings of Nichiren Daishonin. We can let people understand the power of the Gohonzon and establish in this way, step by step, the true law in this land. Thank you very much indeed for listening. Many thanks. Thank you. Thank you, Bill. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.